everybody, I'm Ryan Medora, and I'm here to talk about eighth notes. You've heard me play them already, and you've probably played them yourself, but maybe I can help get even better at playing eighth notes. This is a fundamental concept when it comes to bass playing. Lots of music across all genres feature the use of eighth notes. Some of my favorite is 80s rock, but really all across the board you will be playing eighth notes on your bass. Now the interesting thing about it is not all eighth notes are created equal. Some are played legato, some are played staccato, some of them use passing tones. Sometimes we just hang out on one chord the whole time. So there are a lot of different ways that we can approach playing eighth notes, but this lesson in particular is going to be about note duration and control when we're playing legato and staccato eighth notes. And primarily we're going to be talking about a couple terms called pedaling and pulsing and the difference between the two. So in general, when you are playing eighth notes, you have a couple different approaches you can take. The first is having nice staccato eighth notes. When you do that, you want to have a little bit of space between all the notes that you play. Hear how I create just a little bit of space as opposed to this where I'm playing legato. So staccato eighth notes mean that, like, yeah, you're going to be kind of adding a little bit of space between each attack, and believe it or not, that actually comes from our fretting hand usually. So while our plucking hand may help mute things when you're going back and forth between your index and middle finger, this hand is really going to control the note duration, because if we lift ever so slightly off of the fretboard where we keep our finger on the string but keep the string off of the fretboard, we add a little space. So just think, here's my note. As soon as I lift up with this finger, we get some space. So if we're playing eighth notes and we want to make them staccato, we can just introduce that little bit of space by, just taking this finger still on the string, but just off of the fretboard. When we do this nice and even, it kind of creates a pulse. Now, instead of playing staccato where we have a pulse, if you wanted to even things out a bit and play legato, you would essentially get pedaling. Whereas I play this, you can see that my finger is staying down and I'm playing eighth notes consistently, and there isn't space in between. The notes are kind of just like rolling into one another in a nice smooth legato fashion. So this has a more of an open sensation to it. And it's not quite as rhythmically defined as a staccato eighth note approach. Now, why is it important to know these things? Well, the feel of a song is dependent upon you. You're the bass player. You help impart a certain feel to the music. So having control over note duration and knowing the different ways you can play eighth notes is really going to come into play when it's your turn to really define the feel of a song. So one thing that I like to do is I like to practice going back and forth between legato and staccato eighth notes, just to make sure that I'm doing a good job and I'm practicing, because that's what I want to do. I'm going to bring Mr. Metronome to the party. We're right over here. I like using the Tempo app, but any metronome app or a handheld metronome is going to be good, whatever you need. My metronome is apparently set to 94 BPM. Let's turn that on and see where that's at. This is when I opened my metronome where it was, so hopefully this isn't too crazy. But I'm going to practice playing eighth notes just on G, and I'm first going to play them legato, letting them run into each other, be nice and smooth, and then I'm going to play staccato where I introduce that space and play with note duration. So let's see. I'm going to put my metronome on, and before I start playing, I'm going to let the time roll for a little bit, just to get the feeling of the groove, to make sure that, again, I'm staying true to the time. When you're playing, you're a member of the rhythm section, so it's really important to internalize the time and the feel. So here's my metronome. I'll tap my foot, I'll bop my head, whatever I need to do to help internalize that rhythm. And then I'll start just playing legato eighth notes on G, trying to alternate with my first and my second finger on my plucking hand. Just trying to be as even as possible. And then once I feel like I can confidently do that, I'm going to go staccato, and I'll introduce space. So now we've got more of a pulse. And we have pulse versus pedal. See how when we switch back to legato, it's smoother, it's more of like a bike ride down the block. Pedal, pulse. So once you're comfortable doing that, I would do it at a bunch of different tempos. Like I said, I just put my metronome at 94. Anywhere between like 70 and 100-ish is a really good sweet spot to be working on this concept. And if you're just starting to play staccato, doing the pulse for the first time, you might want to start at a slower tempo, closer to that 70 range. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to practice this with a chord progression. And I'm just going to pretend I'm playing in the key of G. I'm going to go from a G chord, my 1, to C, my 4 chord, up to D, the 5 chord, back to C as the 4 chord, and I'm just going to play a 4-bar phrase. And first I'm going to play it staccato, and then I'm going to play it legato. Let's see what happens. Put the metronome back on. I'll play it again. Kind of like a verse of a song. One more time. One more just to make it even. So 4 times through. Sounds like a verse. Now I'm going to switch to legato. Right. Now I will say it is not as easy as it looks. We're human, we're not a robot, we're not totally metronomic, so you will find that there's little inconsistencies that, maybe your index finger and your middle finger have a slightly different tone or slightly different attack. Maybe you tend to rush one of the feels versus the other. But the goal here is to be as consistent as possible. Even if you're talking, if you're trying to talk and play and there's a metronome going, sometimes you get off a little bit. I may have gotten off a little bit because it's hard to talk and play and hear and count at the same time. But when you're practicing, just as much as possible, if you can internalize the time, understand the feel, and be as consistent as possible, that is the thing to do. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson and that this will help you with your eighth note practice. Head over to my website, ryanmedora.com. Please check out my TrueFire channel or my Patreon page for more goodies, and happy practicing, everybody. Keep it groovy.